Hello everybody, Dr. Dave here. Welcome to Tipsy Vervet. The purpose of our podcast is to help people make sense of life and create meaning. Well, what we talk about is based on our own experiences with addiction and helping other people who are overcoming addiction. The principles that we share are universal, and we think they'll be helpful to anyone who aims to better understand themselves and who wants to cultivate a life that's worth living, regardless of what their past experiences might be.
I'm Pierre, and I've been involved in the addiction community for over a decade. This podcast is independent of any other work we do, and we're in no way affiliated with anyone else. We hope that the spirit that comes across in our conversations is one of compassion, and that you find it helpful. Hello, welcome to the podcast. I'm here with my good friend David. What are we going to talk about today, David?
Well, we've been talking about a life that's worth living, and we've defined a life that's worth living as a learned, willingly maintained lifestyle, healthy lifestyle with equanimity and meaning. And while we're describing exactly what those things mean, one of the most important components of that, which cultivates a life that's comfortable. You know, we talk about serenity. I think that serenity is very much like the definition of mental health, right? The definition of mental health is to be able to face the challenges of every day without falling apart. And equanimity is what enables us to do that. And so I characterize three things in equanimity. Virtue, which is what I want to talk about today. Authenticity, which is being one person. It doesn't mean not necessarily changing and being the same person forever, right? It means not adapting yourself. No, that's not right. It means not changing yourself to be something you think that other people think you should be. It doesn't mean you're not adaptable. Maybe that you express yourself differently under different circumstances, but we'll talk about that in detail.
I engage with my kids and with my colleagues differently. That doesn't make me
exactly. Right. Exactly. Thank you. The third thing is positive thoughts and emotions. Now, for many of us, if we draw what it feels like to feel feelings, many of us sort of operate on this level. That's where a lot of people operate. So this is extremely happy, and this is less happy. But for some of us, we tend to operate here. And some people have referred to that as a constitutional depression, and that's not right. It's just a lower set point than some other people might have. We all know people who seem to be happy all the time, and we all know people who, like myself, are generally Eeyores, right? I suffer from MS syndrome. This is the medical term for it. I'm generally just a bit of a miserable shit. That's fine. The thing is, I sort of tend to operate here. The most important thing about recognizing that is recognizing that. And if that's you, to recognize that it's okay. It doesn't mean you specifically suffer from depression. You might become more melancholy than other people. In fact, you might also suffer from periods of depression more frequently than other people. But to recognize that I operate on this level is very important because it's okay. You operate on that level not because you are a depressive individual, but because that's the nature of your personality. And there may be reasons for it, which are not necessarily that helpful, perhaps, but we tend to operate there. And the thing is, it's okay. The point is to realize if I operate there, I need to try a little bit harder to get myself up there, and a little bit harder that I don't drop down too low. So what I'm saying is that it's okay to operate there, right? But it also means that just like if I have risk factors for cardiovascular disease, I can't do anything about my age. I can't do anything about the fact that I'm a man, and I can't do anything about that my father had a heart attack at the age of 40, so I've got bad genes. But I can stop smoking. I can manage my blood pressure. I can do physical exercise. I can eat healthy nutrition and not drink unhealthy drinks. I can do all the things that I can do for my health. And it's the same with this. I need to, even in the face of not wanting to always, make a bit more of an effort to make life enjoyable and meaningful. The point that I'm trying to make is that if you operate here, it's all right. It's okay. It's you. And, to recognize it and accept it is a lovely thing. But we'll talk about this much more when we talk about meaning. Today, I want to talk about one of the other aspects of equanimity, and that is virtue. And today we're going to talk about the most important thing, the most important message that anyone will ever hear in their entire life. And it's this. It's that every moment leads to the next moment. And that's profoundly important, because what it tells us is that what happens in this moment is astonishingly valuable, because it determines what happens next. And so what that tells us is where I can manage this moment, and we have far more influence over what actually happens than we credit ourselves with. What I manage here is very important because it determines what happens next. I can control the future most of the time, actually, even when I can't control the present, because the way I react to the present determines what happens in the future. And there's a very there's this movement that we should all be focused on the present, and the present is what's most important because the past is gone, the future's not here yet. And of course, well, there's some truth in the fact that the present is what we can immediately influence and what we need to notice, because we won't enjoy anything if we're continually looking forward or we're continually looking back. But the past and the present and the future are the same thing, right? It's like two rivers meeting, right? The present is where the future and the past meets, and it's very fleeting. Time is an incredibly interesting physical aspect. In fact, people who study physics say that time doesn't even exist, So maybe that's a helpful way to look at things, is that, that we're always in the past, we're always in the future, and that is the present. So what happens now is profoundly important. And so I want to present what equanimity means is that I can face the future because I am confident that everything will be okay because I can manage whatever comes my way. Now, we said that life worth living is learned. Clearly, equanimity must be learned, because if I'm going to have confidence that I can manage whatever comes my way, I have to face enough challenges and manage them to learn that I can manage those challenges when they come, but also because I've managed challenges in the past, I'm pretty confident that I'll be able to manage other challenges that come my way, even if I've never experienced them before. And the bigger the challenges you face, the more confident you are that you can face challenges in the future. One of the ways that we grow and learn as a human being is to face hardships, right? And overcome them. And when we spoke about one of the aspects of meaning, which is community, and having other people to do things with, it's much easier to face hardships with other people, knowing there's other people there, and also to face hardships with other people who have faced those hardships before and can teach you how to get through them. But let's have a look at what that equanimity means and how to cultivate equanimity. And when I use the word cultivate, I use it purposefully, like we cultivate a garden. We mow the lawn, we cut back the roses, we cut back the trees sometimes. We don't do that every day, but we do something every day. Maybe we water the garden every day. And this is how we grow into a lifestyle we cultivate it. We learn what to do. We practice doing those things, and we do something every day. So let's have a look at that. Where does virtue fit into cultivation of equanimity? Well, it's a ugly thing. Let's have a look at what happens. We face events. And when I talk about events, I mean things happen. We interact with other people. People say things to us. People do things that affect us. Natural events occur. It rains. It's sunny, whatever. But we face everyday events. Now, we make an assessment of what's actually happening in that event. And so we interpret that event. And that interpretation is very, very important. And it's often something that passes us by because we interpret events almost instantaneously without giving it much thought. And so it's worthwhile thinking about where our interpretations come from. And we'll do a whole podcast on this because it's really, really important. Let's come back to that in a sec and see why it's so important. My interpretation of events influences what happens next. It influences what I think. It influences my emotions and how I feel. Bearing in mind, of course, that I don't actually experience emotions. My brain creates emotions to tell me what my body needs. And I experience that emotion as a feeling. And a feeling is thoughts and bodily sensations associated with that emotion. So, for example, if I'm going into an environment that's unfamiliar to me, my brain will create the emotion of anxiety. If I've got a healthy brain, yeah, my brain will create the anxiety of the emotion of anxiety. And I will experience that emotion as thoughts. Hey, Dave, watch out. Be on your guard. You haven't done this before. Do I need to get some help, right? What should I be wearing? And I will get bodily sensations, a strange feeling of anxiety in my chest, right? Sort of emptiness, a bit of a lump in my throat. This feeling of nervousness. Maybe my heart beats a bit faster. Maybe my palms become a bit sweaty. So I experience that anxiety. And those things influence, or they might influence. I might not do anything about that, right? But I might respond to that. So they influence my behavior. Now, this is extremely important, and it must not pass us by. Both our thoughts and our feelings and our behavior have consequences. In other words, they determine what happens next. So let me give an example. I'm walking down the street. In fact, I had an example of this the other day. I saw somebody in a shopping center who had made fun of me when I was drunk. So I felt very uncomfortable with this person. And actually, I thought about it quite a lot afterwards. So this was some time after that, right? I'm abstinent by this stage. I see them coming towards me in the shopping center, and I feel a strong desire for absolution, strong desire for acceptance, a strong desire for them to give some sort of indication to me that they don't think I'm an idiot, right? They're not laughing at me anymore. That's my interpretation, yeah? My interpretation comes from my past experience with that person and my past experience of being a drunk and my past experience of feeling insecure and my current feelings of insecurity as a consequence of seeing that person coming towards me. So as they come towards me, I smile and I greet them and they walk right past me. They don't even acknowledge me. So my interpretation is that they still think I'm an idiot. Maybe I am an idiot. I feel my self-esteem gets a massive knock on that. And it changes both my thoughts and my feelings. It didn't actually specifically change any behavior, but it had consequences because it changed the way it changed my mood, which changed the way that I approached the rest of my day. It started my thoughts racing, right? I started ruminating about this thing. So my thoughts start going all over the place, So it had consequences. But very often, actually, what happens is when we interpret something, it does influence our behavior. So it's worthwhile having a look at where our interpretations of events come from. So first of all, very clearly, our interpretation of events come from our past experiences. If I'm walking down the street and I get mugged by somebody who has a particular look about them, they're wearing particular clothes, next time I'm walking down the street and I see somebody who looks like that, I'm going to be careful. Our childhood is extremely important, of course, and the influences of our childhood. So that's our parents and our siblings, of course, our family, other influential adults, our school, our teachers. Very, very importantly, the culture that we're in, the religion that we've been exposed to, and many of us actually don't identify as religious, but we live in a religious world, actually. Even in the absence of religion, it's religious in its absence of religion, and it's atheism. So frequently we're very influenced, and we're not always aware of how we're being influenced. Our thoughts about ourselves and our place in the world, and whether we relate to religion or don't relate to religion, our impression of what's right and wrong, of morals, our approach to sex, very often influenced by these things that are from our past and culturally and society, and we're not even aware of them. And we make these interpretations in split seconds based on these. And so one of the things we said that is so important when we're moving into recovery is to talk, to walk, and to write. And this is an exercise that's worth writing about, is to try and identify where my interpretations of events come from, because what these do is they cause me to have prejudices and biases. And you know what? I mean, we all have these. People think, oh, you mustn't be prejudiced, you mustn't be biased. But if you didn't have prejudices and biases, if you didn't make judgments all the time, you would be dead. That's how human beings work. We're assessing things as nice or not nice, pleasant or unpleasant, or neither, neutral, dangerous or not dangerous. We're assessing people all the time. Just seeing people, we make an assessment based on what they look like, how they hold themselves, what their facial expression is, what they're wearing. There's a certain look that we expect certain people to have, and if they don't look like how we expect them to have. So when I go to the doctor, I don't expect the doctor to be wearing a bikini, especially if he's a man, right? So I would probably feel a little bit more uncomfortable if they look like that, right? So we're making assessments all the time on people's color, on people's culture, on people's religion, on the way they look, what they're dressing, what they drive, the type of job they do. I'm not saying we do that all the time, but these are innate within us. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to treat those people differently. And that, I think, is the expression of caustic prejudice. The point is, though, we still do have those prejudices because it changes the way that it changes the category that we put different people in. And not only people, but different types of events as well. And so it's quite a helpful thing to write these down and see where those things come from. Because most of the time, and you can see from this list, and I call these second-hand ideas, right? Second-hand ideas. Because they're not these. I've inherited them. You know? If I'm in a culture that sees a particular group of people in a particular way, and I grow up in that culture, I'm going to grow up to judge people who look a particular way, or who from a particular other country or culture, or a particular other religion. And it may be something that I've never questioned. It also may be that I've never, ever been exposed to these people. And so I've never actually had the opportunity to learn something different about them or form my own assessment. And so it's really helpful to start identifying some of these things just so that I become aware of them, because what that enables me to do is to question them, not so that I won't be biased and prejudice, so that when I'm biased and prejudiced, I can ask myself whether I think that's reasonable. And I can notice how it influences my judgment. So people say that if you're going to be virtuous, you need to be non-judgmental. Clearly, you can't be non-judgmental because that's not how human beings work. That's not how your brain works. And you have to be judgmental because that's how you stay alive. Being non-judgmental doesn't mean being non-judgmental. It means noticing the judgments that you're making and notice how those judgments influence your interpretation of events and other people, and how those interpretations influence your thoughts and your feelings and your behavior and how you move forward into the future. Because when you can recognize that, you can question it and you can say, is this helpful or unhelpful? Because many of our prejudices and biases, which are secondhand, we've inherited from other people, from other situations, and from past experiences, which won't necessarily be repeated, or if they are, won't necessarily turn out the same way, influence what we're going to do. So how is this helpful then? Well, let's take an example. So we're going to keep the spotty page, although we're going to run out of cash buying books, right? There's an event. I interpret that event, and that event influences my thoughts and my feelings and my behaviors, and that has consequences. Now, let me give you an example. So I'm driving along in the traffic. It's rush hour. We're going north. A taxi indicates they want to come in front of me. Now, I know that all taxi drivers are rude. They're always aggressive. They're dangerous. So what do? I speed up, right? To not let them in. But he's a taxi driver, right? He doesn't care. So he pushes in. Now I'm even angrier, right? But he doesn't care. So what do? I hoot. But who gets angry when you hoot? Everybody. But you do, right? You're not the one who gets angry. He's not angry. He's a taxi driver. He's used to this all day. So you hoot at him. Now you're even angrier. But he's a taxi driver. Gives you the taxi salute, right? Now you're even angrier because he's disrespected you. He's invaded your space. But that's just traffic in the morning, right? Anyway, you drive to work. You get to work. By that time, you're in an absolutely foul mood. And how was your trip into work, Dave? It was terrible. Where's that report I know? And so you're just short and snappy with everyone. And then you get home and your wife says to you, hey, how was your day? And it was a terrible day. All because a taxi indicated they want to come in front of you, right? And you didn't let them in. Where was I responsible for that outcome? Yeah. Here's another scenario. I'm driving to work. It's rush hour. We're going north. Taxi driver wants to push in front of me, or he doesn't actually want to push in. He indicates he'd like to come in. We're going north. I drop back. I let him in. Now, I know all taxi drivers are rude and aggressive, but I let him in, and what does he do? He waves. Thanks. Yeah? Boom. Well, I thought all taxi drivers were rude and aggressive, but this one's not. Maybe I was wrong. And if this one's not, there are probably others that are not either. But not only is this taxi driver polite and lovely, this is my taxi driver now. We're tight now, right? We formed this bond together. You don't hoot at me at the traffic, right? You've got to count us as me and the taxi driver and 78 people in his mini. There's 80 of us, right? You don't hoot at me, right? So we saunter off to work. I get to work. So I say, how was your trip in the day? Oh, it was great, Really nice. Thank you. I listened to the music. Nice taxi driver. We were tight. Me and this. I wonder where he is now. Me and this. Do you get it? What I do has profound consequences. What you notice is that not only do my thoughts and feelings, but the consequences of my behavior reinforce my interpretation. If I think that all taxi drivers are bad, And I treat them as such, aggressively, right? Leaving no quarter for them. And they push in, and I have that first scenario. All it does is to reinforce my interpretation. Whereas if I behave differently, despite my bias and prejudices and my unconsidered assessment of people, then the consequences of my behavior are different. And what it does is it calls into question my interpretation, and it calls me to reassess that interpretation.
Right.
So the consequences are extremely important. Now, when the consequences of your behavior change, the whole world around you changes. Your whole experience of the world changes. What you pay attention to changes. And remember that what you pay attention to creates your experience of the world. Yeah. So when the consequences of your behavior change, the whole world around you starts to change, and your experience of that world starts to change. So equanimity is to be reasonably sure, is to start trusting myself, actually. That's what it is. It's to start trusting myself, to have faith in myself that I can manage what comes my way. And when I do, the outcome of what I do will be the very best it can be for me under those circumstances at that time. Now, how can we do that? Because a lot of the time, our interpretation is quite deep-seated, and some of our thoughts are also quite deep-seated. What we think of ourselves and our place in the world, what your parents say to you before the age of 7, becomes that little voice in your head, one of the little voices in your head. We'll talk about that in detail, right? Because you're not the only person who lives in your head, and they're not the only person who lives in your head either. But what your caregivers say to you before the age of 7 becomes one of those little voices in your head, and it can be extremely critical. And it can potentiate some of these biases and prejudices, these second-hand ideas that you've adopted from them, and the other influences that we spoke about just now. And I don't think, actually, for many of us, the old self-help stuff of the 80s and 90s, you probably don't remember because you weren't even born then, but way back in the 1900s, right, when I was only 50, there was this sort of self-help move where you can be anything you want to be. All you have to do is to change the way you think. Just think positive thoughts. And as I mentioned when we started this, many of us actually, we don't really think positive thoughts. We sort of operate on a sort of level of melancholy, yeah? I don't think actually it's possible to change your thoughts just by thinking I need to change my thoughts. I mean, if that was the case, then it would be we'd be different people. I mean, it would have been different people long ago, and I don't think we would have turned to alcohol and other substances to chemically alter our emotions so we could manage them. So if we can't change our thoughts, what can we change? Well, one of the things we can change is our behavior, because we make a decision on how to behave if we can put a space here and experience our thoughts and feelings before we respond. And so this is another exercise, which is a separate podcast, how to pay attention to our thoughts and feelings, and in paying attention to them, give ourselves a choice on how to behave. So we'll talk about that. Very important. But let's assume that we are in control of our faculties. We certainly are in that traffic scenario, right? Because I could speed up automatically, but I do have the opportunity to recognize I've done that and drop back still. So if we can change our behavior, then we need some sort of framework on how to behave that will cause the consequences of our behavior to be the very best they can be for me under those circumstances at that time. And so let's define some of those behaviors, right? And here's a question for you. If you were to be in an intimate relationship with somebody who you were to feel comfortable with, where you could share your innermost thoughts and feelings and emotions without feeling uncomfortable and judged, and without feeling that they have now an unreal image of you. In other words, you're able to be vulnerable with that person. What characteristics would you like that person to have?
you want me to list them?
Yes.
Sure. Okay. Well, authenticity would be a good one.
Okay, so you'd like them to be authentic, yeah?
Right. It's a good starting point always.
You'd like them to be trustworthy, yeah?
Yeah. Compassionate.
Compassionate. What do you mean by compassionate?
Compassionate means the ability to feel empathy.
Okay, what gets you towards two different things there, right? Empathy
Right. Well,
and compassion.
yeah.
Okay, so empathy means that I get you, brother.
Yeah.
I feel you, brother. That's empathy, right? I'm a human being, and because I'm a human being, and I can appreciate what you're going through. I might not have been through it myself, but I can imagine what it might be like to be like that. And in fact, when I feel like that, actually, I might even feel some of the emotions that you're feeling. Yeah. Compassion's slightly different. Compassion goes a little further than empathy. Compassion says, yes, I'm a human being, you're a human being. So I can imagine what it might be like to experience what you're experiencing now. But this is your experience, not my experience. And so it's not going to pull me down. And I would like to help you.
Yes.
And because it doesn't pull me down, it puts me in a position to help you if I am in a position to help you. I might not be able to, but compassion drives me to want to help you. You know? So empathy and compassion are slightly different, and both, I think, are lovely qualities in a human being.
Agreed. Can I say the word mudita?
Yes, right. Okay, so
Let's talk about that. Yeah. Well, you give a much better, a lovely definition of it.
well,
Sympathetic joy.
in Corinthians in the Bible, right? This is where I turned to for this list, because I had been in the church for a long time. I don't regard myself as religious now. But in Corinthians, it defines what love is. And if you notice, these are sort of characteristics of love, right? It talks about someone who does not envy. That's what mudita is. But this is not a list of how not to behave. Remember, everything we do is prescriptive. Everything we do, nothing says don't do this. I don't want to be told what not to do. I don't want to be told what to do. I want to be told how to move forward, how to cultivate this learned, willingly maintained, healthy lifestyle with equanimity and meaning. Tell me how to do it. Don't tell me to stop drinking, right? Does not envy. So I don't know if there's an English word for that. I've looked for it. I don't think there is one, but the Buddhists have a lovely term, which is mudita, right? And they talk about this empathetic joy. Someone who will rejoice with you when things go right. So we both apply for a job, right? But you get it. And I'm happy for you. There'll be another job for me. And I'm happy for you. And we'll go out for a couple of
Coffees.
we shall let our guard down. Or maybe not. Okay, so I think that we'd like that person to be honest. We'd like them to be patient, yeah? Kind, maybe?
Yep.
We'd like them to be humble. Very, very important quality, humility, yeah? Humility is the essence of authenticity. So some people think humility actually is not necessarily a good thing because they regard humility as putting yourself down. I think, people often sort of relate it to false humility. Yeah? I did well in an exam. Oh, well, I didn't really, That's not what humility means. Humility means not thinking too much of yourself, not thinking too little of yourself either. What humility is a lovely sense of your place in the world, what you have to offer other people, where you need to ask for help, where you can receive. We were in a meeting the other day. Remember how that guy defined humility?
Yeah, that was very powerful.
What did he say?
They talked about it being the middle road, and then the two poles, according to how he saw it, was arrogance. He might have used a different word for it. And on the other end of the spectrum was shame.
Arrogance and shame.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not thinking too much of myself, but not thinking too little of myself either.
No, I've never heard it said like that in that way before.
Yeah.
It's lovely.
So you'd like this person to be forgiving, which doesn't mean that they accept everything about you, right? They might call you out or where they think that it's necessary, but they're not going to destroy you for it, pillory you for it, right? You'd like them to be truthful. You like them to be to be loyal, yeah? course, you don't want someone who's going to backbite you and gossip against you.
Attentive.
Yeah, I'd like someone who listens to you, right?
Yeah.
Many of us just want to talk, and we don't want the advice that always follows.
Yes.
Just want the listening ear.
Persevering. And the reason I want you to add that is because I've been in a situation recently with one of the kids where persevering is the lesson that we're trying to impart. And it occurs to me that it's very difficult to teach somebody to persevere if they don't observe me in that same household persevering. And that's been a wonderful theme, and I do my best to see things through. And it's a lovely quality for a person to have. It's definitely something to ascribe to.
And perseverance, quite funny you should mention that, right? Because there's a commonality amongst all of these things, which we'll reveal in a minute.
Yes.
But persevering is a very, very important executive function. It's the prefrontal cortex.
Right.
It's the wisdom. It's a very important, and it is preceded by motivation.
Yes.
And so what we find very often, especially amongst people who've had a difficult past, a difficult childhood, and particularly as soon as you turn to substances, all of this, might probably never had it in the first place, right? The fact that we have low motivation and don't feel motivated to do anything is one of the reasons why we turn to substances to help us manage that discomfort when we have to do something. And many of us give up when we're feeling despondent, or when we're having a bit of a difficult time, or when we're doing something we don't enjoy. So motivation and perseverance. So motivation's not the right word for this list, right? It's motivated. You want someone who's motivated. You need to be motivated.
Yeah.
There's commonality amongst all of these things. All of these are characteristics of virtue. They're virtues. And this is a very, very important quality, virtue. Virtue is a way to behave that relieves suffering. So what you notice about these things, if I behave in this way, I will suffer less and the people around me will suffer less. The easiest one to pick out here, which clearly shows us that, is kindness. If I behave kindly to people, I frequently get kindness back. Not always necessarily, but when I behave kindly, I certainly get less guilt and shame from myself. Unless I'm a psychopath, perhaps, but most of us are not.
Yeah. I think when I behave with kindness, it opens up a whole bunch of different avenues for outcomes, right? One is to get kindness in return. There's a possibility I won't get kindness in return. Maybe I strike up a conversation or a friendship or whatever. The point I'm making is there's multiple outcomes. When I behave with unkindness, there can only be one outcome. I completely close off all the potential and possibilities of the other parts that could have been there had I behaved differently.
And I often get a lack of kindness back.
Of course.
In fact, I often get meanness and anger back, actually. So when I behave patiently, I suffer less because I'm not agitated. I'm wishing things to be different. Acceptance is an active thing. We'll talk about this, but acceptance is an active thing. Patience is accepting the way things are at the moment, that I cannot hurry things along. And in acceptance, I decide how to move forward in recognizing what is actually happening. So acceptance is a very active thing. It's not just a passive thing that I accept whatever comes my way. What acceptance is that I identify that this is a real situation, that this is what's really going on. It's an objective sense of reality. And with that, I stop wishing things to be different. And this is one of the things with patience. I wish things would hurry up, right? I always think when we drive long distances in the traffic, or to go on holiday or something like that, it's less about desperately wanting, not enjoying the journey. It's more about wanting the journey to be over, or wanting to be there, or it's not being patient enough with the journey, right? But when I accept that the journey is going to take me 6 hours, then I can decide what to do with it. I can actually enjoy time in my own head, or to talk with my family in the car. I can download podcasts and listen to them. I don't not enjoy the journey because I'm wishing it to be shorter, because I recognize that it's not. So I want to point out one thing, though. You spoke about unkindness. Unkindness doesn't exist. Impatience doesn't exist. Dishonesty does not exist. Just like darkness is an absence of light, unkindness is an absence of kindness. Impatience is an absence of patience. Dishonesty is an absence of honesty. As soon as I start behaving honestly, the dishonesty falls away. As soon as I start behaving kindly, any absence of kindness disappears because it's filled, that void left by an absence of kindness is filled with kindness. It's like when Jung spoke about the shadow side. This is exactly what he meant, right? So he was talking about if you behave unkindly, it's the darkness of unkindness, the void of unkindness is extinguished by the light of kindness. So our shadow side is the darkness of a lack of virtue, actually.
Well put.
So these are ways to behave that relieve suffering. If I act like this, then the outcome of my actions will be the very best they can be for me and the people around me, most of the time. Not invariably, but most of the time, will be the very best they can be for me at that time under those circumstances. Somebody said to me the other day, you know what, sometimes I behave honestly and sometimes I behave dishonestly. And sometimes the outcome is exactly the same. And so the answer to that person is, well, then you might as well behave honestly. Because the outcome, even sometimes if it's the same, is likely to be worse if you behave dishonestly. Let me rephrase it, like to be better much of the time if you behave honestly. Now, behave is the operative word, right? You can think bad thoughts and do good things. It's not about what's in your head. If you feel impatient but you behave patiently, you're being patient. If you know you can cheat on a test and you'll never get found out, but you don't do it, you're being honest. If you feel that you dislike somebody and they deserve to be punished, but you behave kindly to them, you're being kind. And so it's how you behave that's important, not specifically what's happening in your head, because it's how you behave that how you present yourself to the world, and that's what has the consequences, yeah? Of course, the thoughts and that may have consequences too. If I find that I hate everybody, but I behave kindly and I still feel guilty because I feel like I hate everybody, then I need to actually reassess those thoughts, right? But if I behave kindly to people and they behave kindly to me back, I'm actually unlikely to continue with these thoughts of hating them, right? Because I'm going to see a completely different side of them. And it's like when people say to me, and I do hear it quite a lot from people, all men are bastards. I think to myself, well, there's 7 billion people on the earth, 3.5 billion of them are men. Must be 1 or 2 nice ones. Yeah? Maybe it's actually more about you. Maybe it's, and I don't mean to sound unkind or insensitive, but maybe it's a reflection of the company that you're keeping, you know? Maybe you need to look a little bit harder and maybe perhaps drop some of these dysfunctional relationships if you can. And again, I just want to reiterate, I don't mean to sound insensitive because abusive relationships are very complicated and there are many, many reasons why people stay in them and in fact move from one serial abusive relationship to another. It's a complicated issue and maybe something that we should address another time. But what I'm saying is, if one recognizes that I hold this prejudice or this fixed thought, what am I going to do about it? Because it's not making my life better. Well, so here's the moral of the story. Virtue. You behave like that. Now, when I was invited to do this, what I did is I wrote a list of the virtues that I could identify. And because I'd been in the church and I had a sort of working knowledge of the Bible, that's where I started my list. Honest, trusting. Pretty much the list we've got here, right? But over the years, as I listened to wise people and I practiced some of these things, my list got larger and larger of ways to behave that I wanted to start behaving, that I could identify that I wanted to start behaving in that way. But when I started, I wrote the list down on a little piece of cardboard and I carried it around with me because I wanted to refer to it to remind myself that these are the options that I have to behave. And when I behaved in a particular way and there was an outcome that wasn't particularly helpful, wasn't ideal, I referred back to my list and I said to myself, could I have, this is something that I did where I was responsible for that outcome. And if I'd behaved in a different way, quick squeeze down my list, right? Would the outcome have been different? Would it have been a more helpful outcome? And this is what I think we need to start getting away from good and bad behavior, good and bad thoughts, right and wrong behavior, right and wrong thoughts. And to change that rather to helpful and unhelpful. Some of my thoughts are not that helpful. They make me feel bad about myself. And maybe I need to address those, and we'll talk about those when we talk about authenticity. But if I'm addressing my behavior, some of my behaviors are unhelpful. If I don't behave kindly, that's an unhelpful way to behave, because the outcome is not ideal. If I behave kindly, that's a helpful way to behave, because the outcome is better, not only for me, but for everybody around me. So when I behave like this, consequences of my behavior are different. And when the consequences of my behavior are different, my whole world starts to change. My impression of myself, the way I think about myself. If I think people are hateful, but I change the way I respond to other people, and then I start getting kindness back, I start realizing that the world is not such a dangerous and threatening and unpleasant place. And the world around me starts to change. And when the world around me starts to change, my concept of myself in that world and my view of myself starts to change. One of the ways that we judge ourselves is the same way that we judge other people. We judge other people on the way they behave, right? We don't know what's going on in their head. Now, we know what's going on in our head, so we do judge ourselves based on our thoughts very often. But more importantly, we judge ourselves based on what we see ourselves doing. So if I promise, I continue to make promises and I continually break promises, I'm going to stop trusting myself. I'm going to stop thinking of myself as honest. If I continually return to drinking, I'm going to not necessarily see myself as somebody who can overcome challenges, which might have an impact down the road, right? It might think, well, if I can't overcome this, then I can't overcome other things. Whereas if I see myself overcoming challenges and problems, I start to learn that I can overcome future challenges and problems.
Yeah, that I'm an overcomer.
Exactly.
I love saying that.
Yeah. So let me read. Shall I read this list of?
Oh, yeah, please. I was actually about to say.
It's just like,
give it a read.
It's just because I want. We all have 5 emotions. We only know 5 emotions, right? I'm happy. I'm sad. I'm angry. I can't even think of it.
Frustrated. Impatient. Maybe.
There are hundreds of emotions and combinations of those emotions. And just putting a name to emotions can be incredibly therapeutic.
Absolutely.
And so one of the things that we're beholden to do as we move into this life that's worth living is to start developing a vocabulary for ourselves to describe how we feel, how we're behaving, and who we want to be.
Well, I want to read, please.
Okay.
And
very quickly, because
yeah, I'll go very quickly, but stop me if there's something that you want to touch on. All right. Okay. And this is the first time I'm reading this list of disorder, by the way. Oh, you put it alphabetically. Okay. Attentive, listens, authentic, aware, all.
Or means being inspired, seeing the grandeur of things.
Lovely. Brave, calm, compassionate, companionship, connection, confident, considerate, consistent, courageous, decisive, determined, educated. Educated not in the formal sense specifically, but somebody that's not ignorant. It's attentive and aware and able to take things in as they happen. This is wisdom, right? It's learned from the past. Right.
Yeah. to take things in, to put them into perspective, and to use that knowledge wisely in the future. Yeah. But it can apply also to educated. I mean, everybody has some sort of education, even if it's an education that you get through experience moving through life.
Yeah.
But the point is to be able to use that education in a positive, meaningful way.
Lovely. Effortful, empathetic, encouraging, ethical, fair. You've got here in brackets justice. Flexible, forgiving, friendly, generous, gentle, grateful, honest, hopeful, humble. Independent, insightful, interested, kind, learns from the past, one of the tenets of wisdom, as you just said. Listener, loyal, mindful, non-judgmental, open, participation, patient, persevering, polite, positive, predictable. Predictable?
You don't, somebody's completely emotionally labile, he's just going to fly off the handle. I mean, you all know what it's like to live in a dysfunctional family. I think you said this yesterday.
Yeah.
Where you didn't know what emotion to expect next. 1 minute, the family's all laughing and joking, and the next minute, somebody's having absolute temper tantrum and has lost it like a child.
Yep.
And then it becomes incredibly threatening, especially for a young person.
Right. Prepared to try, present, proactive, protective, rejoices in the good deeds of others. We spoke about that just now. Reliable, resilient, respectful, responsible or takes responsibility, sees the bigger picture, self-compassionate, self-control, stroke self-restraint, self-discipline, sense of humor, sense of perspective, supportive, sympathetic. In brackets here, you've got appreciative, empathetic, joy, mudita, we spoke about that just now. Temperate, in brackets, moderation, self-restraint, self-control. Thoughtful, tolerant, transparent, trustworthy, truthful, unafraid of vulnerability, uplifting, willing to try, willingness to learn, wise. Nice that wise is the last alphabetically, huh? This is great.
So this list is not all correct, is it? Because some of them describe a characteristic where what you want to do is to put it into this context of how to behave. So, I can't think of one now, but some of those are self-control, right? Well, what do you call someone who's got self-control? That would be somebody who's temperate or controlled, even. See, the point is the list is prescriptive. It's how to behave. Now, clearly, I'm all of those things. Just joking, right?
Well, and sometimes none of those things.
The point is, what I'm trying to say is this is not necessarily a list that describes me. But when you embark on a journey of acting like the person you want to become, as I was saying, you can think bad thoughts and do good things.
Yes.
Act like the person you want to become. To do that, you've got to define who you want to become. And you know what? You're born, you die. What you do in the middle is entirely up to you. You got the rest of your life to get this right. So, very briefly, have we got time just to...
Sure, go for it.
How do we do that? How do we learn to do these things? Well, you learn to do these things by putting yourself in a situation where that virtue is required. So we can be kind to everybody. And sometimes there's times where we do get angry and we do get cross and we don't feel like kindness is appropriate. Maybe it's not. Maybe anger is appropriate in some situations and it's protective. You never got angry. That's why I say there's no good or bad emotions. It's what you do with them that makes them helpful or unhelpful. If you never got angry, you'd never be able to protect yourself or your family. You'd never be able to right or wrong. You'd never, if you didn't get angry with yourself, you'd never be able to turn and face your own demons. So, people say, oh, don't get angry. But anger is an incredibly helpful and physiological emotion. Your brain creates emotions to tell you what your body needs. If your brain's creating an emotion, it's not a bad emotion. If you can't identify what that emotion is, then it's not a helpful emotion. Bearing in mind your brain is creating this emotion to tell you what your body needs. So one of the journeys that we're on, and I think maybe this is a definition of recovering from alcoholism, is to learn to feel. To learn to feel again, despite the discomfort of that feeling, because some feelings are not comfortable, right? Anger, resentment, sadness, panic, resentment. Not necessary, but they're functional. They're helpful if you respond to them in an appropriate way. So I sometimes think that in a life of alcoholism where we continually dampen down our emotions, one of the things when we emerge from this into a period of abstinence is to learn to feel again and to identify what those emotions are so that we can respond appropriately.
Right.
So to put ourselves in, we call this intention implementation. In other words, to have an intention to behave patiently, for example. So I implement that by putting myself in a situation where I need to behave patiently. And one way you can actually practice being patient, actually, is just when you go to a meeting, you have to sit with other people, just sit like this, comfortably. I don't actually know why it works, but I think it's because it's very open, it feels uncomfortable, and to become comfortable with sitting like this, because many of us sit like this, and I'm not a big body language person, so there's no harm in sitting like this, and sometimes it just means you're cold or you're a little uncomfortable, whatever, I don't know. But if you sit like this, it's a very open. And it actually, when you start and you sustain this, you can feel very vulnerable. And the off spin of that is to cultivate patience. I'm very, very aware that it's one of the virtues I just did not have, patience. And I practiced. Practice started off with that. And I put myself, and when I was in places where I required to be patient, like waiting for an airplane, for example, at the airport, I was very aware that, sitting there thinking, come on, man, just want to board and get there. But I can't do anything about it. So I listen to podcasts. I watch the people around me. And what I realized after a while is I wasn't doing anything. I was just sitting. And I was okay with it, Look, I mean, this is some years of practicing, but it starts with an awareness that this is the virtue I want to practice.
And a commitment to practicing.
Yes. So another example is if I get agitated in the traffic, I get angry with the traffic when people cut me off or a taxi comes, right? Someone's going to cut that piece out of our podcast and,
I am.
and say that David hates taxi drivers. This is not what I said. Is to go out in the traffic. Not to not feel angry, because you don't decide to feel angry. You don't decide to feel an emotion, right? The emotion arises. You choose how to respond to it. And so you go out in the traffic with the intention implementation, the intention to implement patience, not so you don't feel angry, but to go out with the intention into the traffic to be aware that when you feel angry, you notice it. And when you notice it, now, for the first time in the traffic, you have a choice on how to respond to it. And you can choose. You can choose and shout at the person if you want to. But who gets cross? Or you can feel the anger, experience the anger, and just allow it to rise and subside. And you know what? When you don't hurt at somebody, and when you don't shout at somebody, the anger does subside. For most of us. There are other people with anger issues. We'll talk about that when we talk about authenticity. It's an important example, right? People with anger who say, I've got anger issues. Which they're not. What they're saying is that when something happens, I feel emotions very strongly and I don't have time to experience them before I respond. So we'll talk about it. So that's how we do these things. Identify which ones you want to practice. Identify situations where you would require that and go into that situation with the intention of noticing when that virtue is required. And sometimes, especially like going into the traffic, that's a good example. Maybe it requires you to take somebody with you.
Well, that's precisely what I was going to say next. It might be helpful after the fact or after events or on a regular basis, even better, to just share these experiences with other people or with a mentor.
And if you take somebody out with you in the traffic, you say, I'm really angry right now. And if it's somebody who's wise and empathetic, medita, he'll rejoice with you because you noticed it. They'll say, you know, I can see that. It's okay. It's okay. And that's the point, right? It's okay to be angry in the trail. It's not okay to stop the car, open the boot, take a brick out and hit someone on the head with it. That's not okay. It's not okay to get involved in a road rage incident. And what you notice is that when you manage that anger, what you'll notice is that one day you'll go out and you'll notice that, hey, you know what, I did a whole trip there and didn't get angry. It's the same with the patients.
That was my experience. I just needed to overcome something as overwhelmingly intense as what that anger used to be. I only needed to overcome it once. Because what I found then was such a sense of, I can do this. I don't have to be a slave to it anymore. You know, I've proven to myself that, you know what? And I found that very encouraging. But it had to start somewhere.
You raise a really important point. That if we allow events and our interpretation of the events, which we're not even aware of most of the time, right? We're not aware that we're interpreting.
Yeah.
Because the thoughts, the feelings are automatic, and so are the behaviors most of the time. But if we allow this to continue, you will always be a slave to external circumstances and other people's behavior. You will always be a slave. You will never be free. And you will always, well, it will be more difficult for you to remain abstinent because it's uncomfortable to be a slave. It's uncomfortable to have a continual feeling of not being in control of your own life, right? We call that self-efficacy, having a sense that you're in control of your own life. And if you allow this to continue as it's going, then you will always be a slave to external circumstances and other people's behavior.
Yeah.
So equanimity, the confidence, the self-confidence, faith in myself, the trust in myself, that things will be okay, I can handle whatever comes my way because I've done it before. And I have a sense of how I've cultivated that. And when I behave like that, the consequences of my behavior will be the very best they can be for me under those circumstances at that time. And it's learned because I face repeated challenges. And after a while, I realized that I'm not afraid of other people. I'm not afraid of external circumstances. I might be apprehensive, but I'm not afraid.
Yeah. Well, what a lovely place to close on. So much in there to unpack. The nice thing is that we are going to expand on a lot of the concepts that we spoke about today. You know, we could speak for a whole episode on each single one of those, that beautiful list you made. But that's all the time that we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you'd like some more information, we'll leave some information for you in the bio. And please like and subscribe. Dave always says like and subscribe. And thank you. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, Dave.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.